Um, okay, and now I'm gonna let everybody in. So here we go. Hopefully people will join with all of the
Oh my
power
God.
outages.
Yeah, it's wild in the world.
I know. Okay,
There's like
we
trees
have a
down
couple people
everywhere.
coming on. Welcome everybody. We're so happy that you could join us today. I know all around the city of Pittsburgh, if you're logging in from here, it was a crazy storm last night. But we had a lot of people signed up for this, so we wanted to make sure that we went through and presented this super important topic. So thank you all so much for joining us, for navigating life's final transition. I'm going to quickly introduce Colleen Braktovich from Zachariah Brown, and Carrie McCann is going to be from Moonset and Company, talking both about the legal things that you might want to be thinking about as you get, further on in life's continuum. Um, and then Carrie's going to talk a little bit about what she does, working with families that may have a loved one that's not doing well, and just supporting them all around. So again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to introduce Colleen Braktovich from Zachariah Brown. She's a partner there, to kick this all off. Oh, the other thing is one just housekeeping item. If you have any questions throughout, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You can type the questions in there and I will be monitoring them throughout, and we'll do our best to answer them as they come up. So thanks again and welcome. Go ahead, Colleen.
All right. Well, thank you, Carrie, and thank you to Carrie McCann for being here with me today. As Carrie mentioned, my name is Colleen Bratkovich. I'm one of the partners and attorneys with the law firm of Zachariah Brown. We are elder law and estate planning attorneys, and today we are talking about, maybe one of those things that we don't want to talk about, right? It's our final transition, and I say that we plan for so many other things in our life. We plan when we have kids who are going off to college, we plan when we get married, we plan when we have babies, we plan for all of these life events. None of us are escaping this final transition, as we're calling it. Not it's going to happen to all of us. It's something we're all going to experience. It's something we're going to experience with our families time and time again. And it is something that can be planned for as well. I mean, obviously, we have situations where it's unexpected, or maybe moves faster than we would have anticipated, but there are steps that we can take to plan and things that we can do to make it easier. It's never going to be easy on your family, but things that we can do to make it easier for your family. So, for those of us who maybe are planners, I mean, that's me. I'm a planner. I want to try to plan things in advance. I want to be able to organize to the extent that I can. I like to have control over the things that I can. For those of us who are planners, let's talk about some of those things. And Carrie mentioned that, we'll take questions in the Q&A or box throughout the presentation. So go ahead and make this interactive if you want. But I'm going to start more from the legal perspective of what we can do to plan to protect. So we're going to talk about estate planning, and some of those things. So estate planning isn't just about your assets. Okay. It's about protecting those that you love. We want to, protect our family during some of their most vulnerable moments and ensuring that our wishes are going to be respected and carried out. I think that there's, some of us have perceptions in our mind of what's going to happen. I always say when I sit down with a family to do estate planning, like, what's going to happen to my stuff? And stuff can be a lot. It can be your monetary assets. It can be personal property, things that are important to you, your legacy. What can I do with my stuff, or what's going to happen to it? So you can have some picture in your mind of what you think will happen, but if it's not ever written down, if it's not expressed to those around us, the loved ones that we're going to leave to carry out our desires and wishes, then they're not going to know that's what we wanted. You know, I meet with families all the time that say husband and wife, like, oh, well, you know, we know what each other wants. But on one hand, that can change over a lifetime. You know, what the things that were important to you when you were younger maybe aren't the same anymore. Or the things that you know, maybe you have changed your mind about how you want to leave assets to people, or maybe you have charities that you've wanted to involve and maybe that they've changed, or you're you know, don't align with their values anymore and you want to make changes to that. And maybe you've certain personal property that you felt like it was really important to get to certain individuals, and you know, you want to make sure that that happens. And if your spouse is the only person who knows and they predecease you, you know, who's going to pick up the pieces? So that's where it's important to have these conversations and get things in writing. So we'll talk about a couple of foundational documents that we can have as part of our estate plan. The will, which is, like we said, our cornerstone document, what's going to direct the distribution of the assets of our estate to some extent. We'll talk about how beneficiary designations play into that as well. Living trusts, those are appropriate, you know, for some folks. I'm not here to tell you, like the financial advisors on TV, that everybody needs to go out and get a trust, because it's not true. But trusts are an important part of estate planning, and they can be important for you. And we can, you know, always talk about how the trust can work for you and work with you in carrying out your estate planning wishes. You know, trusts at their most basic are their agreements, their rules, their parameters. They're about control. They're about dictating how assets will pass, who can touch them, for what, when, why. And so that might be important to you. You might want to control as much as you can from beyond the grave how things are being used, who is using them, in what amounts, what they can be used for. And that's where a trust is going to come into play. Powers of attorney, while they are not important after we've passed, because powers of attorney are only good during our lifetime, powers of attorney are extremely important in allowing our loved ones to be able to carry out our wishes prior to our death. So if we are incapacitated or we start to decline in health and we can't do the same things that we did for ourselves prior, you know, it's hard for us to get on the phone with the insurance company, or it's hard for us to go out to the bank to take money out of our savings account and buy a CD with it. You know, we can empower those around us to be able to help us in those actions, to be able to set ourselves up for a smooth estate administration when we pass away. So it's very, very important. We usually harp on it. I'm not going to spend tons of time on it today, just because, again, we're talking about what happens when we pass away, and powers of attorney are not good after death. Healthcare directives, again, equally important. A place for us to make healthcare decision, or to empower somebody to make healthcare decisions for us when we become incapacitated or can't communicate with our physician anymore. Again, not something that's going to be important after death, but it is going to be important in the time leading up to death. What do we want that to look like? We can get, you know, and maybe this is talking a little bit about what Carrie will talk about later. We can get warm and fuzzy. You know, sometimes people go as far as, do you want music playing, and who do you want there, and do you want candles? But it can be more pragmatic too, about I don't want my sister that I haven't seen in 50 years showing up and causing problems. I don't want that person to be there. I want to empower my healthcare agent to make decisions concerning who visits me and concerning who is there at my death. The healthcare power of attorney does also give us a place to give some direction with regard to funeral arrangements. That's the person who's going to be responsible for the disposition of your body. And that's the document that people are going to be looking at in the days leading up to your death. Sometimes people will focus on putting some of that language in their wills if they have really, you know, concrete directives like, I must be cremated, or I want my ashes to be spread X, Y, and Z, or this is what I want to happen at my funeral. But we don't often look at that will until maybe weeks or a month later after somebody passes away. And if the directives are in that will, we may not have seen them in time. So we typically want to put those kinds of directives, and we'll talk a little bit about funeral planning in a little bit. But we want to put that into your healthcare power of attorney, because that's the document people will be looking at in the days leading up to your death. Okay. So understanding a will, a will function basically is two major functions. Okay. One, to determine who is going to be in charge. That person's going to be our executor. And sometimes it can be persons if you have more than one, executors acting together. So we're going to figure out who's going to be in charge. That person's going to be responsible for paying the bills after you pass away, making sure your creditors are satisfied, claiming the assets as they exist, maybe selling real estate or liquidating other assets, and making the distributions out in accordance with your estate plan. And that's the second part of the will is what is our distribution scheme going to look like? How do we want assets to pass? Do we have certain dollar figures? Do we have certain percentages? Do we have equal shares? Do we have unequal shares? Are we leaving money to charity? What family members are we including? Do we have pets that we need to leave money for to maintain their care? Setting up trusts for our animals. So there's all kinds of things to consider. And again, these are all things we want to do to plan in advance. The things that we need to have consideration for. If we have minor children, so we're going to mention that. Our minor children cannot inherit money from us. Okay, they have to be over the age of 18. So somebody's going to have to be responsible for their money. We want to make decisions about how they're going to receive that money. Because I know myself, 18 or 21, I wouldn't have been able to handle money appropriately or make the right decisions. So we want to make sure that there's somebody in charge. We want to make sure that we are maybe setting parameters about how that money is used. It's only used for health, education, maintenance, and support until age 25, or they're going to get a portion of it at age 21 and then the rest at age 25 or 30. So the other piece of your, taking care of your minor children is who is going to take care of their person, who's going to be a guardian for them if they have no natural parents remaining. So who's going to be responsible for their care? That can be somebody who's different from who's in charge of the money, or it could be the same person. We want to take time to talk about these things. We don't want to imagine the possibility that our children are minors and their parents are not there to care for them. But as traumatic as that is, think about also not knowing where you're going to go. You're not knowing who's going to take care of you, where you're going to live. So it's so important for us to have those hard conversations because we can plan, because we can take time to really think about who is going to be able to nurture our children and raise them in the way that we want them to be raised. We don't want to leave that up to chance. So we want to make sure we put that into play. And we just mentioned the probate process. That's the process of having your will registered with the Register of Wills and having the courts oversee to make sure all of those things that you have designated are carried out. Okay, it gives your beneficiaries a place to go if they didn't get something that they were supposed to, or something didn't work out the way that it was supposed to. So our will is our foundation of our estate plan. Okay, so it's one of our most important estate planning documents, and it's where most of us start when we talk about estate planning. And it's extremely important if we're trying to plan in advance to help our family transition after we are gone. But I mentioned 60% of individuals die without a will. Okay, so it's so important. It's our opportunity to plan. It's our opportunity to guide our family in how they want to honor our wishes. But 60% of us don't have one. So, if we don't have a will, I think sometimes people think too, if we don't have a will, what happens? Does the state get our stuff? And it's not that the state gets our stuff, it's that the state dictates who gets our stuff. Okay, so it's called intestate succession. If you die without a will, you die intestate. So if we die intestate and we have a children and no spouse, our children inherit everything. Okay, if we die with a spouse but no children or parents, our spouse gets everything. Okay, so that might seem reasonable to some folks, but this is where it starts to get really crazy. So if you have a spouse and children, and your children are your children together, so they're children from your spouse, you still have to split the money. So your spouse gets the first $30,000 plus half of the balance, and then your kids get the other half. So even if they're your kids together, we're still losing half of our estate to our children. and maybe losing is not the right word, but think of it in terms of Pennsylvania law. We have Pennsylvania inheritance tax, right? Your spouse doesn't pay an inheritance tax. There's a 0% tax rate, but your kids pay 4.5%. So you're intending your spouse is going to have this money. They're going to continue to live off of it for the rest of their life. And your kids very well could say, yeah, mom, dad, you keep the money and you use it to live off of, but we're still losing 4.5% of it to Pennsylvania inheritance taxes that we wouldn't have owed otherwise if we had a will saying that we were leaving assets to our spouse. Okay. And this next one is really hard too, because a lot of times young couples will say like, well, we don't really have anything yet, or we don't have kids we have to protect. What do we need a will for? But if you have a spouse and oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. Your spouse and your kids who are not your kids together. This is an extremely important one too. But your spouse and your kids who are not your children together, they split 50-50. So there is no 30,000 off the top for your spouse. So again, as I just mentioned, your kids are splitting with your spouse. Your spouse is not going to have money available. Now, that might be okay with you, because if they're not your kids together, maybe you did want your children to receive 50% of it. But understand that that's what happens when you don't have a will, that your spouse and kids will have to split. But your spouse and your parents, if you have a spouse and you still have your parents, your spouse inherits the first $30,000 plus half of the balance, and your parents get the other half. Okay, so this is where I'm saying those young couples who are married thinking maybe, my spouse is going to inherit everything from me if I pass away, and finding out that no, they're going to have to split it with your parents. Okay, so that's something to really take into consideration if you're a young person who's not sure why you really need a will. If you want your spouse to inherit from you, you need to put it in writing, because otherwise they're splitting it with your parents. Okay, and if you have parents but no spouse or kids, your parents inherit everything. And this could be difficult too when folks get older. We deal with a lot of families in our elder law practice who are applying for Pennsylvania Medicaid. They have a loved one who is in a nursing home, or, they've reduced their assets, they don't have a lot of money, and they are now receiving government benefits that are necessary to them sustaining their lives, because they're either receiving care at home or they're living in a nursing home. And now their child dies. Because the child didn't have a will, mom or dad's inheriting the assets from the child. Well, now, one, we've upset the benefits for the person who's living in the nursing home. They have to spend those assets down, and that money could have benefited somebody else. Maybe this person has brothers or sisters, or they have nieces or nephews, or even charities that they'd want to support, rather than having that money just go to pay nursing home bills. So if you are single and your next of kin is your parents, you want to make sure that you really do want them inheriting from you, if it makes sense at that time in their life for them to inherit from you. And if your parents are gone too, and you have your siblings, that goes to your siblings. Okay, and it still goes out from there too. So if you have your siblings have passed away and you have nieces or nephews, or then it goes out from there to your cousins and then the children of your cousins. So you really have to have no relatives, closer to you than children of cousins, before you actually have assets escheat back to the state of Pennsylvania. Okay, so for the most part, somebody is getting your stuff, whether you have a will or not, but you don't get to dictate who gets it or in what amounts. Okay. I'm just going to touch briefly on trusts. Like I said, they have their place in estate planning. It is a place for us to give control, to dictate how assets will be used, to decide who's getting them when and in what amounts. We have revocable trust, irrevocable trust, and sometimes we have special trust if somebody has special needs. Let me just take this moment to mention too, if you have special needs individuals in your life, your kids, grandkids, brothers, sisters who need to be provided for, it is extremely important to pre-plan. So important to have a plan, because I have witnessed with clients of mine is the situation where there is an adult dependent child who is unable of caring for themselves, no plans in place. Mom and dad die. Dad, it wasn't sudden. Dad died first. Mom died years later. We have no Social Security benefits coming in. So there's no income for that child. We have no health insurance set up, no Medicaid coming in for that child. There's no money set aside. So we have no plan. and this child is incapable of taking care of themselves. They need 24-hour care immediately from the, the day that mom died, and there's no plan in place. We cannot leave that up to chance. We have to plan. We have to have a contingency plan. Who is coming to pick up that adult child? Is it a brother or sister, or a trusted friend? In this case, there was a trusted friend, fortunately, who was able to come and get them. But we have to have a plan. Who's going to get them? How are we going to pay for their care? And where are they going to go in a more permanent situation? Okay, we need to have those plans in place. So if you have special needs folks in your life, it has to be part of the plan. We talked about the advanced directives. Okay, so you're choosing somebody to be a healthcare decision maker for you. Your living will is a place for you to give guidance to your family about how you want them to decide for you at the end of your life. Giving instructions about what kind of comfort care you would want. What kinds of treatment would you consider to be burdensome and not want to continue on with? Do you want everything? There's folks who say, you keep me alive at every single possible cost. It doesn't matter. Do everything for me. So, and if those are your wishes again, too, you want to give those indications to your family so they know that they're making the right decision for you and honoring your wishes. It's such a difficult and emotional time as it is. And to have burden them with having to question whether they're making the right call is, it's an undue burden. Okay, you want to make things as easy as possible for your family in these difficult days. So give them guidance, have conversations, put it in writing into your living will. What do you want them to do? Okay, and the HIPAA authorization, just giving somebody access to your protected health information is important. Again, I'm not going to harp a lot on funeral planning because I am not a funeral director, but there's so much that can be planned for in advance. You can talk about the types of services that you want. Is there a religious component that you want to include? And those things can change from time to time too. You have clients who maybe when they started thinking about it when they're in their 60s and they say, yeah, I'm going to have a traditional 2-day viewing, and then we're going to have a big church service and a big, luncheon and all these things. And these folks live till 97, 98 years old. Well, all the people they were going to invite aren't around anymore. And the people that were going to come to the ceremony aren't there. And so then maybe it makes sense to pare that back a little bit. Maybe we're just going to do a 1-day viewing, or, maybe the religious component doesn't mean the same to us as it did 30 years before. The church that we went to isn't in existence anymore. We have some changes. Folks who would have probably never considered cremation in the past, maybe would consider something like that now. I mean, cremation doesn't have to necessarily be from the get-go. It can be a method of the disposition of the body after the viewing. So instead of the burial, you'll do the cremation, but you'll still have the traditional viewing and all of those things. So there's so much that can be planned for. Your personal touches. Do you have specific songs to be played in the church or readings to be read? Do you have certain pictures, do you have, old family wedding photos you want to be displayed? Are there things that are personal to you that you want to be buried with, or things that you want to make sure are if you have your wedding ring on, it's taken off before you're buried? Any, considerations there? These are all things that we can talk about. How are we going to pay for it? So funerals are expensive. So is that something that we're going to pay for in advance? Or do we have some money set aside that our family knows they can get their hands on to use to pay for the funeral expenses in those early days after our death? So that's something to consider as well. And all of that can be written down. You can pre-plan with your funeral director and have everything written down. You can pre-plan and prepay if that's something that feels right to you. So having thoughtful conversations about your funeral arrangements is really going to be meaningful to your family. And it's something that you can consider. And again, helping that family in that time of grief. If everything's on autopilot and all they have to do is make that phone call to the funeral director, it's so much easier than having to sit there and be deciding what should we buy, which casket should we buy, or if I buy this, am I being too cheap? Do I need to spend more money, or what's my family member going to think? So having all of that laid out in advance is really helpful. Financial preparedness, things like taking an inventory of your assets. So writing down what you have, what banks you use, do you have professionals that you work with? So do you have an attorney? Do you have a financial advisor, an insurance agent? So the people that work with you on your stuff, the people who've been part of this plan who can help your family in those days. But, writing down what you have and trying to keep it up to date, because we change banks and we change investment strategies and insurance companies. It seems change on us all the time. We're getting a new letter saying that this company's been bought by this company. So trying to have a comprehensive list of what you have is going to be really helpful for your family, and letting them know where it's being kept is also helpful. Things like, our retirement accounts, our investments, our bank accounts, our insurance policies. If we have life insurance policies, do we have disability policies or long-term care? Maybe the latter is not so important with regard to death, but letting our family know where they are. How about if we have debt? It might be helpful to let the family know if there's a lot of bills. Something that happens after somebody passes away is the executor has a duty to pay creditors in a certain priority order. Okay. And so if they pay those creditors out of priority order, they become personally liable for those debts. Typically, your debts do not pass on. Okay, so your kids are not inheriting your debts. They don't have to pay them off. But if the executor pays the wrong person in the wrong order, they could have to personally pay. So you don't want your kids to think, oh, mom or dad have no debt. Some medical bills start coming in, we start paying these medical bills, and then turns out there's all kinds of creditors and we paid them in the wrong priority order, because we just thought we had a couple of bills and there would be plenty of money to pay. So we want to talk about those things, give some indication to our family. The emotional preparation, again, Carrie's going to talk more about this, but having those family conversations. Do we have a personal legacy that we want to leave? Do we have any support services that we can leave for our family members, giving them resources of people that they might be able to talk to? We'll talk about digital legacy. I mean, this is changing more and more for us as the years go on. Folks that 10 years ago would have never even imagined having an online footprint do. What about your My UPMC or your AHN My Chart accounts, where all your medical records are? We use email for everything. So folks that even maybe, like I said, 10 years ago would not have had to be concerned about their digital legacy do now. Okay. And so all the big guys, our Apples and our Googles, and they have things in place to be able for you to put legacy contacts in place. So, I can go onto my iPhone and I could indicate who my legacy contact is. So Apple knows who they're allowed to give information to after I pass away. Okay. And Apple's not the only one, Google does it. Samsung does it. We have our other providers who are all now getting on board, because 10 years ago, it was really difficult when somebody passed away and you wanted to get access. I handled a case that we actually had to go to court for, because younger person passed away. Mom wanted to be able to get into his iPhone to get some of the pictures out, and Apple's locked down. That's private. We don't have to give that to you. It doesn't matter that you're the executor of the estate. We don't have to give that information to you. It's not explicit in your will. So again, this is a place we can plan on our will too. It's not explicit in the will that we have to give the executor access to this information. And we had to get a court order for it. So now, again, Apple has this legacy contact option, so we can, have that established, and so they know who they're allowed to give information to. Passwords are ever changing. We have so many places where we have to change our passwords every 90 days. So it is hard to always keep up with that, but to the extent that you can, or enlist the help of a password manager that you can give a legacy contact to so that they can get all your passwords, that is extremely helpful, to your family. The social media accounts and email accounts, how do we shut those down? Who's responsible for shutting them down? Social media gives you the opportunity now to have a memorial page. So now we can convert an account from a traditional Facebook or Instagram account to a memorial account, so that it can stay there. People can still share their memories of that person or see pictures, and have a place to kind of gather the information for that person, but being able to convert those over. Other types of digital assets like cryptocurrency or digital bank accounts, because there's not a paper statement coming in the mail, we want to make sure that we're making a plan. Our executor is going to know that those things exist, that they know how to find them and access them. So we want to make sure that we are giving information to our loved ones to cover those things. There sometimes can be some tax planning to be concerned about. Lots of folks now, because of the federal estate and gift tax exemptions being so high this year, being $13.9 million per person. It's not as big of a consideration for families as it used to be. But if you have a business or have a lot of real estate and, could be in danger of having to pay that federal estate tax, we want to do some planning there. Gifting strategies if it's appropriate for you. So talking about those things ahead of time. A lot of times folks find that they really shouldn't be gifting to their kids, and are maybe causing bigger consequences for their children when they do those things. So again, it has to be part of our plan and something that we can talk about. Do we have charities that we want to support? So that's a consideration too. So we can get some tax deductions for leaving money to charity or reducing our net worth of our estate by giving money to charity over our lifetime. And making transfers on retirements, or on our retirement account. So let me take this moment to mention that about our retirement accounts and any asset that has a beneficiary. That beneficiary designation is going to take priority over what it says in your will. So it doesn't matter if it says my will leaves, to my kids in equal shares. If I only put one child on that retirement account, or I leave the retirement account to my sister, that's who's getting that. It doesn't matter what it says in my will. The beneficiary designation is going to take priority. So we want to make sure that we really are cognizant of those beneficiary designations and we're putting things in line. It doesn't have to say the same thing by any means. You absolutely can leave your IRA to your sister and have your will say goes to my kids in equal shares. But if you intend that everything be the same for across the board, you want to make sure that the beneficiary designations are going to be in line with your will and your estate plan. So some special circumstances to think about. If we have blended families, that's always more complicated. So planning for stepchildren or our spouse who's not the parent of our children. Again, trust can be very helpful in those situations because we can set rules and parameters around how money is used or how assets are used. So it's more important to plan when we're in a blended family situation. International assets. I've met with a family that, recently, the woman technically is a Pennsylvania resident, but she lived and worked in London. So she has a house in the UK. She has bank accounts in the UK and an investment account there, a retirement account. And it's not cohesive. We're having trouble because we're having to do probate in both places. A trust probably would have been really helpful in her situation, had she taken the steps to do that. So business succession. If you own a business, especially family businesses, it can get so ugly in estate administration because you typically have maybe one child or two children who work in the business and other ones who don't. And, that's extremely valuable when they start to inherit that. And what are we doing when we're trying to balance out the interests with the other kids? And again, you don't have to balance out the interests with the other kids, but when families want to try to do that, or if it's intentional, the ones who maybe aren't getting as big a piece of the pie start to feel slighted, and that can cause a family dynamic problems. So to the extent that we can plan and have those things provided for, it's really good. And I talked about the special needs planning already in advance. So very important. And I'm just gonna, that would just saying, review your things regularly when, you have major life events or major changes, people are born, died. Your estate plan is a living, breathing thing. So we want to make sure that we're looking at it. It's time for you to take action, gather your information, figure out what you have, list your accounts, properties, and personal items, assemble your team. So get your attorney, your financial advisor, your tax professional, interview potential death doulas. So you're going to talk to Carrie in a minute and you can talk to her. Create your documents. If you don't have those wills or powers of attorney or trusts, get them done. let's stop procrastinating, and we can have peace of mind that those documents are done, get them in place, communicating our plan to our key people. So talking to our loved ones, our kids that we're putting in the position of executor, or our siblings that are going to be our power of attorney, talking to them and letting them know that that's important. Just a follow up here, our last slide before I turn it over to Carrie. Just this is your legacy and your choice. So making sure that you are empowered to protect your loved ones, you have the opportunity to plan in advance, and providing peace of mind to for yourself and for your family because you've prepared in advance. So I'm turning it over to Carrie. We're going to take a breath. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and she's going to start sharing hers.
Thanks, Colleen. Oops. Okay, the technology piece is always clunky, so bear with me while I get my screen shared.
And I was going to say in the interim, we haven't had any questions yet, but I am monitoring that.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Great. All right, so we just heard a lot of information, and I'm going to share even more information, but I'd love for us to slow down and take a couple breaths together before we shift into this next piece here. So if it feels okay for you, you can close your eyes. If that doesn't feel okay for you, maybe gaze down at the ground or even outside if you're near windows. And just take a couple nice big breaths. So all together we'll breathe in, and we'll take a nice big breath out. We'll breathe in, and we'll take a nice big breath out. And one more time, we'll breathe in, and we'll take another big breath out. Awesome. Maybe it feels good to stretch a little bit. Do something that feels good for your body. Thank you for those who participated in our breath moment. My name is Carrie, and like Colleen mentioned, I am a death doula, and I got into this work because of needs that I was seeing in my own family. So my mom was having a major medical health issue, and I realized that I was kind of coordinating everything. I was helping to check in on how people were doing. I was making sure that all of the needs were met in my family, and was like, wow, it would be really nice to have someone else to do this for us. And I realized that that is the role of a death doula. And I started going down the path of being a death doula after spending about 10 years as a social worker and a mediator, and working with families and youth. These sort of life experiences brought me into end of life care. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the more emotional and spiritual side of preparing for end of life. And that can be from a caregiver perspective, maybe losing a parent, and that might be from your own perspective, preparing for your own death. I work with folks before, during, and after death. So I do a lot of grief work. I do a lot of helping folks prepare and coming up with different ideas on how to support people through that challenging process. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. So one of the first things that we can do, and Colleen touched on some of this, but is thinking about different legacy projects. So oftentimes when we think of legacy, we are thinking about our estate planning and our assets, but our legacy is so much more than that. So it's really fun to think about creative and really personal ways to leave a legacy. And that can be big or small. So that might be like some folks make annual events that happen. Some folks start foundations, and those are bigger examples of what a legacy may be. But that might be like a recipe book or a scrapbook that you pass down in your family. It might be a little corner of a garden. That's this one garden for grandma who loved the roses over here. So really so many possibilities of that. Some folks write a what I learned letter that they pass on to the next generation. So really there's so many options here. And the more creative you can be and the more personal you can be, the better that this is and the more meaningful it is for your family who's receiving it. One thing that I do with folks is living funerals, which means folks are celebrating their life while they're still alive. And again, these tend to be really personal. There's one example, and this wasn't someone I worked with, but I always love this example that they loved different shows and they loved synchronized swimming. And so they put on a synchronized swimming show in kiddie pools in their backyard. So these can really be any kind of like fun celebration, but also a chance to honor someone or be honored while you're still alive and say the things that we wanted to say to someone while they're still alive. Another thing that we do with folks is obituary writing. So a lot of people don't think about writing their own obituary, and that's always an option that people have, and a really nice option because that obituary lives on for a long time. Like 3 generations from now may look back in documents and find that obituary and be like, oh, this is how about my great great grandpa. Like I would have never known this information about them. So being personal with your obituary and being able to be a part of that and write that while you're still alive can be a really special thing to do. So the next piece is we want to talk about it. So talking about end of life is hard. Talking about planning for end of life can be really hard. And culturally, depending on the family that you were raised in and the culture that you were raised in, some cultures really don't like to talk about end of life. So we want to try as much as we can to not let it be the elephant in the room. We want to try to start small if we can. If, let's say, you're trying to talk to a loved one about their planning and you're like, I've already met with Colleen, I already know what we need. And you kind of have an idea of what needs to happen, but your loved one isn't really open to talking. We want to start small. We want to have check-ins. We want to find the entry points around that. And there's always support around this. So someone like Colleen or someone like myself, or even someone like a therapist can really help you to do this and create different ideas. But don't be discouraged if like the first conversation is shut down. There's always different ways and different techniques that you can start to talk to your loved one. And it takes practice and being honest. And another really good thing to do around this is think about your why. Why are you having this conversation? And sometimes it can be helpful to share with your loved one why exactly it is. Like, why is this important to you? What values are coming up for you, or what fears are coming up for you that you're wanting to have this conversation and really talk about end of life planning. And when we're talking about it, one thing that I do with folks is have conversations beyond the medical. And Colleen kind of referenced this earlier, but beyond that advanced directive, again, really getting into people's values, figuring out what's important to them, but also thinking about if we don't always have the option to have choices around the way that we're dying, but if we do, what do we want that to be like? Who do we want there? Who don't we want there? Right? That's a hard conversation to have sometimes. What do we want the room to sound like? What do we want the room to smell like? Do we like bright sunshine, or do we want it to be a little more shaded? And obviously people can change their mind about this, and that changes as people change and as our needs change. But getting an idea and really thinking through what might I want this to be like. One thing that's really helpful is thinking about different practices that are soothing and comforting for you, and kind of jotting those down so that your loved ones can have that and say, okay, I already knew this about mom, but we're in a hard time and I've forgotten. Here's mom's list of things that are comforting. Or you can say, here's my list of things that are comforting. So lots of different options there, but really thinking about how do we holistically support people. One thing I wanted to mention here that's like that people can do that a lot of people don't know about is there's different choirs that will come sing to you. And this sometimes happens through your church, but you can also find threshold choirs out in the world that will come sing to people at end of life. And it's a really beautiful offering and different ways to just think about, again, what might I want that to be like? If you're getting stuck and aren't sure where to start, I just put a few resources here for you for conversation starters. The Conversation Project is online and they fully focus on how to have end of life conversations. Really wonderful book talking about death won't kill you. And they speak to this as well. And then if your family or the people that you're having these conversations with are like games, there's a game called the Death Deck, and you pull cards and people answer different questions. And they're like, some are serious and some are funny. So it's a nice light way to get these conversations started. So it's hard to think about planning for end of life without acknowledging grief. And so I just wanted to do that and acknowledge how hard this is. And in some ways, we can be as prepared as we can be, but we're still going to grieve. It's still going to be difficult. Putting these different things into place is very supportive and can make our grief process a little bit smoother. But losing someone you love is hard no matter what. And just a couple notes around this. There's something called anticipatory grief that a lot of folks don't know about. And that's the grief that you feel before a loss even happens. So knowing that you are dying or knowing that your loved one is dying, there's big grief that comes up around that. And just even, I think, sometimes acknowledging that that's what this is can be really supportive and really helpful. And so, yeah, we want to acknowledge what's coming up. And as much as we can, name what's coming up. And again, this is hard, so be patient with yourself, be patient with your loved ones. Excuse the fuzziness of this image, but I love this image so much. Whether it's anticipatory grief or grief after a loss, it it shows what we think the stages of grief are going to look like, and then it shows kind of what grief is actually like. And I show that just to offer you some love and grace and kindness, and hopes that you can offer that to yourself as you move through those really difficult and challenging full body emotions and experiences, because grief isn't just an emotion, it is a full being experience that we all go through at some point in life. Okay, so thinking about grief and thinking about end of life, one thing that I do with folks that can be really helpful is think about your own self-care inventory. So when we are in the moment, when we are in a time that is so challenging and difficult, it's really easy to forget all the tools that we have to take care of ourselves, right? I'm sure lots of folks can resonate with that. And then I sometimes don't even like to bring up self-care because it's like a big eye roll. People are like, oh, this lady's going to talk to me about self-care again. But it is really important. And I think about self-care as every single part of our life, we can think about ways to incorporate care into. And it doesn't have to be like a long, hour-long thing or a full day thing. Like sometimes self-care is, I have 1 minute. I have 3 minutes. So what can I do in that amount of time? And so we're actually going to pause. I just checked the time. We have 1 minute to do this. So we're going to pause and we're going to think of our own 1 minute self-care techniques. And if you have a piece of paper with you, I'm going to encourage you to write down at least 3 things that take 1 minute that you can do. And so we're just going to pause for 30 seconds to do this. So if you have a piece of paper, we have the topics on the right-hand side. so you can get some ideas of different areas of your life that you might be thinking about. But 1 minute self-care techniques that you can do. I hope everybody got 3. I did. I'm actually going to share mine because sometimes it's helpful to hear from other people. And these are not things I pre-planned, but what I actually wrote down in this moment of things that may be supportive. One thing that I do that's very helpful is I think about the different parts of my life where I'm in transition. So oftentimes for me, it's in the car and taking a couple big breaths before I get out of the car, or sitting there for 1 minute and zoning out before I get out of the car and before I enter the next place where I'm entering into. The other thing I could do in 1 minute is stand in the sunshine right now. I can do that. So when the sun's available, that's a wonderful thing to do. And the last is like, I put down jumping jacks, which feels really random, but like sometimes you have like you have a lot of stuck energy that needs to move. So finding something that's fun that you can like kind of jump around or have a dance break can be really helpful. So just some 1 minute ideas for you that I hope maybe you can bring into your life and think about truly when you have some time creating this list for yourself or creating this list with your loved one so that you have it to reference down the line when you're like, I'm so stressed out and I cannot think of how to support myself in this moment. And then finally, this is the biggest thing I hope that you can take away. The biggest way that I think we can prepare for the end of our life or the end of our loved one's life is living our life fully. So deathbed regrets are real, and something that I think about and I consider when I'm making big and sometimes small decisions is, when I am on my deathbed, am I going to look back and regret this moment? Or when I'm on my deathbed, am I going to look back and be like, man, I wish I had that conversation? And so, as much as we can, living our life fully now, thinking about our values regularly and how do we live out those values, thinking about what is joyful for us in our life and how can we be present and truly live into our life, I think is a big way that we can prepare for the end of it. And finally, get support. Like I mentioned, this is hard and there are people here to support you. So, you know, Colleen talked about all the different ways that she can support you and all the different knowledge that she has. And there's so many professionals out there and so many friends and family out there that are ready and willing and excited to support each other through this process. So we're not meant to do this alone. We're meant to be in community with each other, and just want to encourage you to reach out to your community. And if you're like, I need support, but I'm not sure where to go, a death doula is a great place to start. So Oregon Colleen is a great place to start. So we're connected with other folks and we're like, yeah, you need to be here. You need to be here. So I encourage you to reach out to us, and yeah, get the support that you need and want and deserve.
All right, well, thank you, Carrie. So here's our contact information. I will, stay with you for a few minutes to see if anybody else has any residual questions they want to ask. But here's our contact information where you can find us. As we typically say at the end of a webinar, if you feel that there would be value in getting copies of the slides, you can contact us and we can send you a copy of the presentation. Hopefully, as with the rest of our webinars, you should be able to find that in its entirety on our website at some point. With our other publications, videos, webinars. We try to make all of that information available to you via our website, which is zachbrownlaw.com. And, we can make sure Carrie gets copies too, so she can forward them out to those who might be contacting her directly. But again, we thank you for coming today. And I don't know, seeing
Yeah,
no
I
other
think we're good.
questions.
Yeah, no questions. I feel much more relaxed though, Carrie. I
Good.
think that was wonderful. So hopefully we all go away today with some great self-care. And definitely if you found this helpful to you, I think we're going to do this again in the future, maybe in the fall. I think there was a lot of good response for it. I know a lot of people were without power today, so we're definitely going to repeat this, sometime in the future. All righty. Well, I guess with that, we don't
Thank
have
you,
any
everyone.
questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.